Hello. Okay, so today I want to not necessarily make, I'm not creating, I'm reflecting. But in doing so, in inscribing it here, I am creating. So that's what's going on. Um, I want to talk about my headspace. I want to talk about things that I feel. I want to talk about things that I'm kind of upset about right now. The reason I'm making this in there, and I apologize because I like to ramble a lot. I don't really have a outline for this topic or anything like that. I just have a lot of thoughts I need to go down, and that's where I'm at right now. So, where am I right now? It is 2024. I have been raised how would I describe? I have been raised a socialist, I guess, pretty much everywhere down the line. My family was very big on community contributions. My family was really big on, was really big just generally on in the real world. I am still waiting to hear back as far as any sort of neurodivergence is concerned. I mean, I think that it's genuinely pretty obvious, but I still don't have a diagnosis in any way particular form. And as such, constant consistency, maybe I'll get a break. So let's talk about that. There's a lot of things in the world that don't make sense to me. I have almost never gotten a job through my resume, but I was told throughout my entire high school career, like, you have to work on this. You have to constantly keep on top of this. And the thing is, we'll get back to that a little bit later when we're talking here, is it's not just a resume. The resume and its relationship with getting a job is just one thread in this tattered coat of the idea happen to be students. Let me just say that you shouldn't feel bad if you have a job you don't like so much. It is my general experience in people to get there. My first job that I ever took was a handout job from my father. And my dad worked in the music business when I was born. Basically, the day I was born, my dad decided to transition his life to be more oriented towards what he wanted at that time. And as such, he opened up a music store. That is both respectful in the people that I have met through this first job that I went through, as well as my life, because again, he ran the store parallel to my development, and ultimately caused some strain in that way because he wasn't present because of market demands. But he owned he didn't want to say it the way that like it was basically a music community space. It's actually kind of difficult the more that I try to describe it as a business, because it was made by the people for the people. He basically opened up a reserved parcel of land where you could record in a dedicated recording studio with 4 or 5 booths and a couple of others in the storage space on the other side. A retail front where one could purchase replacement parts for instruments, amplifiers, any sorts of things, as well as used gear in that way for people who did not have their gear yet and they wanted to be their own jukebox heroes. And then we also had rehearsal spaces available as well, soundproofed boxes that were basically right next to the train tracks where nobody would basically get any noise complaints. And this model was generally pretty successful. My dad had a couple of things that ultimately led to the closure of this business, roughly around 2007, 2008. I was getting into seventh and eighth grade. He felt very guilty that he hadn't had a lot of time to develop a positive relationship with the family. And also, from a business perspective, we are starting to see the beginning budding parts of the mega corporations coming in and playing their standard playbook of selling low until they basically throttle out the business and then reinstate fees. You know, standard monopoly shit. It's this exact sort of philosophy that ultimately causes me to have an ire towards capitalism in general, because my father had a successful legacy that was pulled out from underneath him, rug pulled by Guitar Center, which ultimately came to town, knocked out as many as independent music stores as possible, and then did what they do. If you shop at Guitar Center, like the people there don't necessarily know 100% about the things that they're doing. Get to know every single piece of equipment in the store. Actually, let's keep that going. So basically, he had to foreclose the business. He was not able to sell everything, and so one of the family curses that we have had sitting on our backs, the albatross around our family's neck, is 4 or 5 storage spaces worth of hundreds of dollars of musical gear that can no longer be utilized. And I don't feel bad in saying this. I'm not talking about location or anything. I feel as though this is something that if I were to talk about it out loud, that I would get chastised or reprimanded for pointing out, oh, there's wealth in this particular thing. But the fact of the matter is that it's a curse. And it is another thing that has contributed to my hatred of capitalism and everything, because once we foreclosed the business and had to put all that in there, not only was this a financial toll on us while we were also trying to work on paying off a mortgage. Again, this is all my parents' stuff. Like, this is just all the stuff that I picked up later on. Not only were we struggling to pay a mortgage, but we were also trying to pay off 4 storage spaces that we had to move from month to month so that we could get as best of a deal as possible. So was already an employee of his store before I was formally employed, because I was one of his workers. I was one of his mover men. I was one of the guys at 12, 13 years old to be moving 80-pound amplifiers and as much as I could into trucks and stay there for moral support for 4 or 5 days, moving all of the stuff from one space to the other, having to deal with a lot of emotional turmoil because, again, like, we couldn't really hire professional movers to do it. Either that or we just, my dad is not a very trustworthy person. So let's move into my life. After I got out of high school, I was not very interested in going to college because it costs money. I was more interested in trying to juggle a career and my college at the same time. And even in college, I didn't really know what to do either. I'd taken up an acting degree because I found out that I was generally pretty good at it in high school. But my passion for the craft eventually faded once I realized I was in it for very not particularly noble intentions. But that kind of like moves on because, again, I'm talking about the first job. I wouldn't get into college until much later. But I was offered a job from my father to work at his store, which now was getting a physical storefront. And I helped him build the facade of the business. I helped ramjet 2x4s into the Midtown Furniture Building in Sacramento, which is still standing today if you want to. It's on 12th and E Street, by where the old SPCA is, or generally where Taqueria Jalisco is, or it's the bridge right before you get to the casino. No, it's definitely. I live in Boston now, so I don't remember my city grid so well, and I'm not going to go check it out because I want to continue talking about this. But you can still find the constructions of the things that I did in Midtown if you were to look. Um, my dad signed a business agreement with a less than scrupulous businessman, and that ended up being our undoing. But I do want to talk about the nature of the job. I was paid $10 a day with commissions, and commissions came a little bit later. Um, and as you may recognize, $10 a day is not a fair wage. It is not even a fair wage in 2012, but I was giving myself a benefit point where I realized that the house was getting foreclosed on, and then I went and rented my own apartment with a couple of friends of mine. We made a YouTube channel together, and then kind of slowly collapsed like a fan in a cupboard. Everybody's still doing well, but I don't necessarily talk to very many of them anymore. So I want to sit down. It's very difficult for me to lean, but I also don't really want to sit down because I don't have a chair that's not broken right now. This is going to be a common theme. If you're like, damn, that's sad, don't worry about it. It gets worse. So again, I was paying $10 a day, and in order to make ends meet, also I was donating plasma while also working as a moonlighting while I wasn't getting paid, trying to work on my acting degree. Doing shows, memorizing lines, making friends, going out to parties. Pretty solid upbringing. I did some stupid shit. Everybody does stupid shit in college. But we're talking about work. And thankfully, I wasn't doing too much stupid shit. We're talking about work. Naturally, things were very difficult, and I wasn't paid a fair wage. And on top of that, I was also kind of browbeaten. My father is a very short-fused person, and we had numerous spats between each other. I definitely, you know what, speaking of which, a lot of emotional and social things that kind of don't work very well. And again, it boils down a lot to the fact that I went a very long time without treatment. And it's, I did my best up until then. But even now, I'm still kind of like, So, so again, I was making $10 a day. I was also donating plasma, which ended up paying me more per week than I was making other than that. But I was also making commissions, which meant that I was basically learning a trade because my father thought it was very important for me to learn a trade. And now I have a general idea of how to work on, I know how to fix my own gear now. I know how to solder a component. I know how general wiring diagrams work. I understand how electrical parts kind of generally interact with one another. It's a skill set that has kind of escaped me at this point because I have needed to utilize that brain space for other jobs. I kind of miss doing electrical work. I wish I could do it as a hobby, but unfortunately, me and capitalism don't get along very well, and it's kind of difficult for me to get into my hobbies. But let's continue talking about that. I worked for my dad for about 2 or 3 years, and during that time, we met a lot of regulars. We had a lot of different things happen that were just terrible. We had a lot of really cool things happen as well. Couple of events I can think of off the top of my head is that through the community, we were able to connect with one of America's most famous blues musicians, or at least at the time, which was Joe Bonamassa, who, if you're not familiar with him, is a self-taught musician who learned how to play the blues on guitar. He was already very adept at learning how to play the guitar, and he taught himself how to sing the blues. And I got complimented by him as well to say that I had a pretty good knack for music because I was playing it in there because I was very starstruck. And I really liked his song Dust Bowl at the time. And it was nice to be able to hear that I think the general low light is that at one point our store got robbed, and nothing happened. It made me harbor some serious problematic behavior with the Sacramento Police Department, because my understanding of the story from the outside is that we had our shop broken into by a couple of base heads. That's people who utilize and almost overdose on drugs. And the reason we know this is because the robber was not very smart. They left the hammer that they broke into our shop with. They left fingerprints on our glass, and they left fingerprints on the hammer. They weren't wearing gloves. They stole only the cool stuff that was there, they're thinking that it would turn a profit. And we put the report in with the Sacramento Police Department, and they, as far as I understand, they found the guy, they found his Facebook page, and then proceeded to do nothing to get any of the gear back, some of which was repair work that I was working on that I lost commissions on. I had a couple of projects stowed up. And we had to basically pay out all the people who lost gear. Sacramento PD did nothing. The only piece of gear we did get back was because one of our regulars located one of our guitars in Guitar Center. And that was it. We didn't see any closure to that. We didn't see anything from there. As far as I know, the gear is still stolen. And it's been 10, 12 years at this point since that happened. Naturally, like, again, as far as I know, we found the guy. He didn't get tried. He didn't get found. He didn't get pulled apart. Like, you know, any of that. As far as it is now, the statute of limitations is over. So, like, we lost. The business folded a couple of months later when our landlord came and said that we'd been missing rent payments, and it's because our subletter was turning our rent into cocaine. And we lost that. And I left a job where I was not in a very good space mentally. I was overworked and overwhelmed. I was holding on and trying to do my college, DD. I was trying to get paid to do stuff. I was trying to hold a house down. I was coming home to a room where only half of it was mine. And now I've just lost my job. After that, I was lucky enough to get a position working as a cobweb cleaner under the table for a townhome apartment complex. And that was an interesting gig because it was the only thing I knew how to do. At the previous job that I was at, my father would consistently tell me every single time I got in these emotional spats that I would get fired from those jobs and that I wasn't safe to go to other places. But he also was not interested in helping me get any treatment for my mental illness or any of that, because we simply couldn't afford it, and we couldn't look through insurance stuff. And my dad is an anti-vaxxer and kind of very anti-Western medicine. So, I was working as a cobwebber for basically 6 months. And then the rains came and started washing away the cobwebs, and I realized I couldn't make any money doing that. And so I didn't know how to find a job. Nobody around me knew how to help me find a job. I didn't know how to look for job advisors. I was generally kind of not very trusting of any sort of establishment, because that's the house that I grew up in as well. This is the very beginning of this whole political era of all sorts of stuff and all sorts of these. It's very confusing. And so I basically pleaded with them, and thankfully I had a good manager, and she basically hired me as an office agent under the table so that I could help space out my work and get a couple of extra hours, during the weekend at least. And eating it, but I didn't like the idea of trying to peddle townhomes to because I was the son. It's a father and son business. It's one of those lolly adverb stores. It's the work dynamic is not the same as if you're working with somebody who's not connected to you in any other way other than they're your coworker or your boss or something like that. And I would consider my worker identity at this time to be just generally sort of like a gremlin. Like I was just like kind of straddled with all the work that nobody else wanted to do. And granted, I was pretty capable at doing anything I was asked to do. And I got asked to do a lot of things. But on top of cobwebbing, I also got in charge of doing like trash duties. I also was in charge of managing the office and managing like real estate leads and contracts and stuff like that. I published their newspaper or newsletter while I was on board there with Microsoft Publisher. I cleaned the pool. I wrote down a whole like set of things that I did. Like I was a general contractor for them, like through and through, but completely under the table because again, like that's how I got hired, and then I would have to go through the hiring process. And we didn't end up doing that. I think it was because everybody was busy. So yeah, them because I was under the table, and I didn't really have any complaints. I was really happy about the fact that I was able to kind of do stuff. But granted, again, I was still trying to go to school, getting paid to donate my plasma, coming home to a 2-bedroom apartment with 5 people in it, smoking weed a lot to cope, essentially. Which is why it makes it difficult for me to like access these times as well, because I was really stoned a lot of the time during there. Time just passed. I turned 21 and then all of a sudden I was 24 and then all of a sudden I was 27. Here I am 30. And at least here it's a little bit different because, Boston is a little bit more hopeful. You can do more things in Boston than you can in Sacramento. Or at least I feel like I can. But I kept working there until October of 2015, I think. I graduated in 2012. And then I worked at my dad's shop for about 3 years. I also worked at Southwood Townhomes for a little while. And during that time, I also got into a car accident, which screwed my back up. And then I wasn't really able to go see anybody. So it set kind of wrong. And granted, I am in perfect health and the x-rays say everything's fine, but my muscles have always been kind of messed up ever since. And I don't know whether or not that's psychological trauma or whatever. But unfortunately, that's not my call to make. And I am still in line. Leaving the local newspaper company in Sacramento Bee in order to work as a job as a sandwich artisan at a local mom and pop franchise in Sacramento known as the Sandwich Spot. And he was basically leaving the job behind for me. And I picked it up. I was the best interviewer. Everybody else that was interviewing is basically brand new to the hire market and didn't have any idea what they were doing. I showed up in a suit and I had an acting degree and I've already done this kind of thing before, so I was guaranteed the job. And it's the job that I've had the most amount of happiness at done. And granted, it was a part-time job. It wasn't like too crazy. I came in but it was easy. Put pieces of paper together in a pile, put them in a bag, send them off. Easy. My coworkers there were cool. The job was easy. But the thing that was the most important was that the pay, it's not that the job was easy. It's that the pay was finally supporting me. It's the one thing that I kind of have to like pull like from this is like one of the things that I get a lot of flack for from my domestic environment is that I don't work hard enough. And they think that I'm lazy. Oh, this is on omnidirectional. 1 second. Check 1, 2. Whatever. I'm going to put it back because I was at least getting something on the other one. Okay. So one of the things that I get from a lot from my domestic atmosphere is that I'm very lazy. And when I am doing that, I notice that I am not being compensated for putting in that extra effort. It started with Southwood because, again, I was doing everything for these guys. I beyond the things I was also talking about, I cleaned their gutters. I maintained their second property. I cleaned their pool on there as well. I hammered new door numbers in there. I painted some of the things that were like I did a lot of things for this joint. But I wasn't compensated properly or fairly for any of this, and it's not as though I can put those skills down on my resume and say that they are legitimate, you know? Like, I've worked in these general labor spots, and I like doing general labor. I like doing easy stuff, mostly because I don't have to think about it so much. But the thing about it as well is that when I'm working a job where I have to think about a lot of things, I notice that I'm in a group of people where the brains that are amongst me are not geared to think about multiple things. You know, I'm not calling my coworkers stupid. I'm just saying that they should be in different jobs. But the problem is that capitalism kind of makes us scramble to get money any possible way that we can. And we find ourselves in jobs that we don't like very much, that we position that I didn't have so much of a scope. I didn't have a responsibility to kind of have anything on. My responsibility was simple. Put paper in bag, put bag on basement. Easy. Very little ways to get that screwed up. And granted, like there were some days again where like the labor was kind of difficult, but what it came down to was that the trucks were late or the printer got jammed or we didn't have access to a super printer and that we would have to be printing dots, which is promotional material for the paper. And we're only dealing with, a printer that can only print like 20 pages per minute. And so like we have to sit there waiting for like an hour and hope and pray that doesn't jam because we're using special paper. It's not hard. Okay. Like when I'm saying these things, it's like, oh man, that's a lot of things to keep track of. Well, just hold your horses because again, this is the easiest job I've ever had to do. And I love doing it. And again, I'm going to talk about another thing down the line because I'm also waiting on a couple of jobs, which is the final thing that I want to talk about as well. But it created a job where I felt like, while I had responsibilities, the responsibilities were big enough to where I felt like I was capable of doing them and that I was praised for being able to do that work over and over again. And I was getting paid more than it was a $14 an hour. At Southwood, I forgot to mention, I got paid, I think, $8 an hour to be there, which was better than $10 a day by any margin whatsoever. So at least in the Sacramento Bee, I was getting paid proper minimum wage. And it was part-time, but it was still fine for me to be able to, live within my means. I could pay my rent. I could pay my utility bills. I could go off and do some things from time to time. I could at least pay, to get on the bus and go to places that were free because Sacramento has a lot of places where you can walk around. Or bike or do whatever. And again, like I was biking and granted my back hurt for quite a while, but later on down the line, I would eventually get back into bicycling and try to take advantage of that. I was still going to school while I was going to the Bee, and that ended up being kind of an issue again with acting. But it was also around that time that I stopped acting as well because I kind of fell out of favor with it. I mentioned that I wasn't doing it for noble reasons, and that was because that I got into acting in high school originally to meet members of the opposite sex. And that ended up, I'm not going to say that I wasn't doing theater for noble intentions at that point. It's just that I had gotten so sore. The positive inclinations of doing theater at that point had basically run bare. We were doing a production where the script got changed out little by little until we were working a completely different script. We had a new set of actors that were bringing their own energy, which I wasn't very big on. It was just generally kind of like a mess. I think I had finally like gotten to a point where I was like, okay, like between the drama that's going on in this particular clique and the all of this, I don't feel like I'm acting for positive things. I'm coming in, I'm saying my lines, I'm leaving. I don't feel like I'm making any friends here. Whenever the casts fall apart, I stop talking to the people that are like, that we created a very firm bond with as actors in our troupe. And I know a little bit of that comes down to me because I'm not a very conversational person, but it's a two-way street, and it made me feel sort of down. I've always kind of craved like sort of attention and that sort of thing. And again, like ultimately, I recognized that hey, this was what was going on with my acting career, so I might as well call it here. And so I was able to focus on doing stuff at the B. Sacramento Bee was also the first job where I started working night shifts, but at least it wasn't as egregious as when I started working in Boston, where I'm going to be working pretty much only night shifts. From there, I was hired at the Nepotism Edge. Didn't have to work about my resume. I had my mom, who was working as the secretary at that particular school, had worked there for like 3 years, and she basically drummed me up as being this wonderful guy from this channel that are specifically from my students because I was a good guy. Anti-capitalist sentiments had become very much hardened, and I kind of felt empowered in a certain sort of way to just kind of be that way. I got to also kind of show off that I'm a non-binary person and show to my kids that that's okay to be that. I felt like it really made my eyes pop. I got into nail polish around this time as well. And while I don't necessarily do it so much anymore, during that time it was kind of validating for both sides, because again, I'm working with kids that are born in this generation who are attached to the internet. And the thing that I have about this job is that I am very interested socially. There are so many problems that I see with my existence as an kind of guy, and there's a whole lot of malarkey in schools as it stands, to try and kind of involve more of this, because our reading, writing, arithmetic is slow era. I'm going to move my chair because I am talking about something I'm passionate about, and I'm back to this is rolled up in this kind of way. So this is something that I had a problem with when I was growing up in school as well, is that like even when I was a kid, because I was growing up with my father, who was generally pretty not very simpatico with institutions and establishments in general, and just kind of got worse and worse as time went on, is that you kind of have an eye for when teachers are kind of being assholes for no reason. And when you're a kid, you take it personally. Thankfully, because again, I think that I'm kind of neurodivergent and I don't take that sort of thing personally from my teachers, especially if they are constantly trying to at least show that they are trying to be a positive influence. I will see the better in that and go, you know what? Why did you do that? Why did you yell at me? Why did you do that? And then the job where I was that guy, and I realized why they had to do that. First of all, I don't want to talk about the education system. I want to talk about my job. And I'm not being asked to talk about the education system or any of my opinions as far as that goes. But I just want to say that my job as an after-school aide was very eye-opening for a number of reasons. It showed me a great deal of hope in the future generation, because I was able to communicate with them and do so in a way that allowed them to open themselves up as human beings and share fundamental things about themselves that they would not share with their other adult peers, simply because their adult peers were trying to teach them a lesson or trying to guide them in a certain sort of way. I was always the gentle hand. I was always like, what are you interested in? And, I'm not going going to say that I don't think that it's a good thing that most kids are into, say, Five Nights at Freddy's or Poppy Playtime or Sonic EXE or Friday Night Funkin'. But I don't really have a way kind of to do those sorts of things. Those are the things that were kind of big. Oh, Among Us. A lot of people a lot of kids, trying to play imposter and all that sort of thing. And the thing that I kind of came away with is just like, naturally our hierarchy of society is so inherently violent in America, but we want to deny it so hard. It's ridiculous. When we come into that, like when a kid comes in and says, I want to talk about my favorite movie. I just saw it a second ago. It's called Child's Play, and it's about this doll named Chucky, and he's so cool, and he has this knife, and that like when he's around, he just sits around and he doesn't do anything. But when you're just by himself and you start doing some weird things, he comes out with his knife and he comes alive and he kills you. And I remember when I was a kid, the early 2000s was very much about making statements, countercultural statements about what was allowed in media and what you could get away with saying. And I am straddled with the knowledge of knowing that I am kind of dealing with the after effects of that sort of social hierarchy now, where people kind of take things completely out of regard because our social understanding of the world around us is so pulled loose and by the, goatsy. The pulled. That's what I'm talking about. Like, that's, when I do this, what's going on. I don't, like, if you were to say that to, like, in school, like, everybody knows what a goatsy is from my generation. It's gross. It's disgusting, but we know what it is. What do we do with that information? Once you have seen a man spread his orifice with his own bare hands, what do you do with that information? And everybody tries to kill the security guard because they have a certain thing against the purple guy, and they want to basically make it so that, the security guard gets his just desserts. That's fair. And there's a lot of, the thing that's also very interesting about that most adults that are in the school system recognize is that they get stopped by that thing. Thematically, the kids understand the revenge plot of the dolls against William Afton. They get that. Okay? That's the thing that was so fascinating to me, is that, yes, kids are kind of dumb, but in that dumbness, they are so smart. And sometimes the kids are really, really smart about the things that we value as, we as adults value as things that it's okay to be smart about. Naturally, again, as somebody who's neurodivergent, I understand, again, not diagnosed, but I know myself. Hyperfixations can happen at any time for any sort of thing. And I think that's perfect. I want to inspire that. The problem is that I was working with a community that couldn't support it in two different ways. One, we have regressive political leanings when it comes to what we can teach the kids. And that's not just, we're teaching the kids the same stuff that we learned back in the 1950s. They use the same materials, but that's for the second thing, which is the financial problem. But the first problem, as far as that goes, is that, again, we have, in the school system, you can almost talk about absolutely nothing because so many parents are so sensitive about the fact that their kids learn things without their knowledge or understanding, and things that they don't understand themselves. And that's not fair. They can't do that. But the problem is, sorry, you were born during the time of the internet. And granted, you are a parent during this time. You have a lot more things to worry about, like your rent and your job and your food and making sure that there's food on the table for your kid. Granted, some of the time, a little bit of information is going to slip under the internet censor, and that kid is going to learn about pornography for the first time at 6 years old. And just because they're not comfortable about talking about it makes it difficult for us to talk about it. I can't tell you how many times I had kids come up to me and talk about penises and vaginas, and I'm like, you are 8. You're 8. Granted, great. I'm glad that you know about these things. I wish I could talk to you in a way that was progressive. But the problem is that you're going to be excited about that. You're going to talk about that because that's going to be the highlight of your day, is that finally somebody's willing to talk about penises and vaginas with me. and they're going to go home to their parent and talk about, oh, like we had a great time. Me and Mr. Nathan, we talked about penises and vaginas. And they're going to be like, what? And there's a misunderstanding in there. And then all of a sudden, like, that was one of the things that I was constantly dealing with. It was stressful in the fact that I wanted to be able to have full relationships with these young people and talk with them about things that their counterparts weren't particularly interested in, so that I could guide that knowledge in a way that would be fundamentally progressive for them moving forward into middle school and high school, where they might be making confusing decisions about their life that might completely change the fundamental course of what they wanted in elementary school. Anyway, I'm very, very passionate about that. That's kind of why it was heartbreaking for me to do this, is because, again, I found myself in a place of a lot of financial struggles. We don't support our teachers. I don't think that is a very surprising thing to say. America is absolutely known for it. But the fundamental thing about that is that if you do not have the finances to be able to do the things that you want to do, you create a hellscape. You create the conditions under which kids go and say, I'm not taking my kid to school. I didn't get to do anything cool when I was in school. And we always talked about that. And that's the way that it is. And I got taught nothing but bullshit. And I was taught by teachers who didn't care about me. I'm not taking my kid to school. That destroys a handshake between us fundamentally moving us forward as a society by educating our young people, because we are making it so difficult for them to, like, again, I'm passionate about this, right? And I'm passionate about my kids growing up, and I'm passionate about my community. That's another thing, is that this was a community job. I picked this job out, and I got it because I wanted to help improve the livelihood of my hometown around me. All kids that were in this school were also roughly around where I lived. These were people who were going to grow up with me. These are people that I was going to see at the grocery store. These are people that I was going to see at GameStop. These are people that I was going to see in the Dollar Tree. Like, I think, like, one of the things that I'm really, really wanting from a job is to be able to create connections with people. And again, in a school job, you do that, but it's not socially acceptable generally to kind of do that. I'm thankful that my students still check in on me from time to time and that I'm able to have conversations with them. I know that I'm not necessarily the best at it, but again, it's because I feel socially sort of like kind of pressed into a box. I don't want to create any misunderstandings, because misunderstandings are so hard to iron out, and it takes so much time to do that. Like, I make a decision, I want to keep moving forward after I've made that decision, but no, there's something that's a problem here that keeps me here and keeps me rolling in this position. Even though I want to be here, I'm rolling here because there was a misunderstanding and I have to iron up my steps and stuff like that. That can get really frustrating because you don't get paid to do that sort of work. I worked at 2 different places. I worked during COVID during that time. It was a very interesting time to be an after-school program during COVID because there was no school, so there was no after-school. So basically what we did was we made hyper-sanitized learning pods that basically allowed parents to drop their kids off in a place, because daycare is okay. Here's the thing, is that also another thing about this is that education is not the main thing. This is another thing that harbored a greater deal of capitalist ire within me, like when brought me closer to a socialist gig, is that most people send their kids to after-school programs not because they want their kids to be educated or anything like that. It is because they are working 5 jobs and they need to keep their kids involved so they don't cause chaos at home because they don't have enough rapport with their own kids, whether or not to trust them with certain things. Or, maybe they don't have those discussions, or maybe the kids just straight up aren't, reliable enough to kind of do that. But that's the thing, is that they're not trying to edify their kids. They're just trying to placate what's going on so that they have full control over their environment so they can go and do another job so they can put money on the table because the economy is so fucked up. It's just a constant. I learned this in my first job, a cascading failure of all sorts of different things. When one electrical part fails down the line and you fix it and you don't think about take a look at the rest of the flow of it, you're going to have a cascading failure. It's going to go boom, 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 boom. Very important lesson I learned in my first job. I'm not going to say that it was a bad job. I learned a lot of things from every single job that I went to. But a lot of the lessons that I took from my jobs is that the world is just really, really fucked up and we don't have enough wherewithal to fix it. So I got really messed up as far as that goes. At that time, I was also getting kicked out of my grandma's house. Not because my grandma didn't like me, but because her leasing company didn't like the fact that I was living there because it was a senior home. And there were other young people in the complex that were selling drugs from the senior home, which had nothing to do with my grandma, but we lived right next to the manager's house, and she was pissed off that I was coming home late every night because I was working a second job doing DoorDash so I could pay my fucking bills. It just creates, it's a cascading failure, little by little, bit by bit. So I got kicked out of my grandma's house. I was homeless for about half a month. And then I moved to Boston where I was homeless for about a month and a half. I had a really bad psychological break because I realized I moved and then kind of threw away everything for kind of something stupid. And from there, I started working at Domino's. I had a job at Domino's before I had a house because I was basically working at Domino's so I could put the down payment down on a house. Because Boston has different renting schemes that require that you have an additional month's worth of rent so that you can pay the broker for finding the apartment. It's a scam, but it's what we put up with, So, not Boston. I'm actually in one of the boroughs. I'm in Malden, and that's one of the things that's kind of big here is that you don't claim Boston. You claim whatever neighborhood you're actually from. I started working for Domino's. I have a whole other separate video rant for Domino's. But it is the one job that caused the most amount of capitalist hatred that I have because of how absolutely little I felt, even in the small town Domino's up here in New England. There's a whole story about this, but again, I don't feel like I was treated very well. I have this all sort of thing. I will talk about this at a different time. I'm going on basically an hour at this point. But here's a couple of the greatest hits that you can expect from the next time. Asking for sick time and not getting it. Making friends with people who don't talk to you anymore. Getting a pay cut in the middle of me working at a 5-star store for no discernible reason. Cultural othering because I am an American working at a business that is not made for Americans. Fun fact. We'll talk about it. Yeah, we'll talk about it. But those are some of the hits that you can expect from the upcoming thing that I have to say about Domino's. I worked there and I continue to work there now because Domino's is so loose as a franchise and as a business that whether or not you get fired is actually, it happens if you haven't worked there for, I guess, a certain amount of time. You're no longer an employee, but if you don't work there for another amount of time, it doesn't matter. Granted, I was only working as a part-time driver there, which again, kind of works out, but I've met people who are full-time drivers. They don't get very much respect either. So I've also met overtime drivers who also do not get absolutely any respect. It is just a horrifying capitalist hellscape. And I can only imagine that this sort of thing is going on in every other multinational billionaire business. and it makes it very difficult for me to want to go out and get fast food. But also right now, I am in between jobs, so I kind of have to rely on it in order to kind of work things. Also, transitioning a couple of life decisions as well. My job after that is that I got picked. I at this point, at the 55-minute mark, perfect. At this point, after I stopped working at Swampscott Domino's, I no longer had any interest in wanting to go find a job. And that's where I'm at right now. The jobs that I have gotten at this point, again, I needed a resume, but I had already gotten the job basically confirmed because I got them from my friends here in Boston. The first one was a night shift janitor job at TD Garden. And I recently quit that job and was most likely going to get fired, if not reprimanded, because one of my coworkers decided to say, well, this guy just disappears on shift. Okay, so we've gone 55 minutes at this point. We've heard my background as a worker. I want to talk about janitronics for a little bit. I actually talked about, whoops. Oh, well. I talked about where I am and where I'm working and all that sort of stuff. But again, I wrote a letter about it, and who cares? I worked as a third shift grounds porter, which means that I was working from 10 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning. It's a job that nobody wants to do because it's Saturdays and Sundays. It's, on the day that everybody decides to go off and do stuff. And I didn't get to know very much about my coworkers. I only met one of them, and it was because he spoke English. And he basically told me that he worked 3 other jobs. He worked a morning shift at a fishery. He worked DoorDash in between, and he was also working this job as well, part-time. And that was depressing because he would basically just walk from one job, get on the T, go to the fishery, clean fish. And that's the way that it was. I didn't get to meet any of my other coworkers because they didn't speak English. And the ones that did speak English didn't speak English to me because I don't know. I'm the gringo. I guess I wasn't very interesting or, kind of outside of the sort of, cultural scape that I was in. I don't feel bad about it. Again, I'm working a job that only Latin workers kind of wanted to kind of do. That's kind of just generally been the vibe. I get told a lot, like, Nathan, you realize that when you're working your job that you're working with other people who don't speak English. I'm like, yeah, because I don't like doing jobs. And we're kind of like at this point, like, I don't want to keep doing menial labor for nothing. Menial labor for peanuts, for no respect, to know that every single time I'm working on something, it's moving towards the detriment of some other industry, or it's breaking into resources, or I know for a fact that something's not being done responsibly, lack of efficiency. I'm just tired of being there. And where I'm at in this country is that everybody is overworked and is not giving 100% to the jobs that they have. And I don't want to work with people who also do not feel proud of the things that they do. I'm not proud of the things that I do. Like, I work in America on my tax dollars. Every single hour that I work, I'm sending income tax to the White House, and the White House is using that money to fund genocides in Israel and in Ukraine and Iraq and Afghanistan and Kosovo and a lot of other places that I happen to be alive for. I don't want to contribute to that system anymore. I'm at the same point where I was acting, where, like, I go in, I do my job, I get paid, but in this case, I can't walk away from acting, and I can't walk away from rent. I can't walk away from feeding myself. I can't walk away from groceries. I can't walk away from utilities. They are bound to me, but I do not have the wherewithal to kind of want to continue to do this. Now, where am I at now? I recently quit my job at Electronics. I'm going to go do another job. I got recently hired to work at a warehouse. which reminds me a lot of the B gig. But once again, I find myself now that it has been 2 weeks. I'm still waiting on the phone call. In fact, I'm probably missing it right now. Nah, it's, what is it, Friday? It's like the end of the work week. They're not going to call me and say, yeah, we're ready to go. We've got the class all set up. Come on down tomorrow on Saturday at the very end of the work week. Like, that's not going to happen. So this company is a lot more structured. There's a lot more efficiency. There's tons of bennies. It's my first ever full-time position ever. And it's from 1 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning, which allows me to have my days free, which is fantastic. It's kind of like just generally ideal for the way that I kind of work. But I'm waiting on them. I'm waiting on them to set stuff up. I'm waiting on them to recognize me. I'm waiting on them to respect me. And so far, it's been 2 weeks. It is the 5th of April. And, I've missed out on 5 days of work that I would have liked to do so that I could have my rent paid. And again, this is a full-time job, so I would know that I had my rent paid at the very end of the week. That would be really cool. I want to start paying back my credit card debts. I want to start getting all this stuff like handled and knocked out. But I'm waiting on them. So I'm working Uber. No, wait, I can't work Uber because I'm in the middle of a background check. Because even though I did a background check, I work for DoorDash and Uber as well as Plan Bs because you got to make money somehow. And I don't have a lot of connections for prostitution. And I don't have a lot of connections for fetish material. And I don't have a lot of connections for Bitcoin. And I don't have a lot of connections for the actual the industries that make money in this economy. Instead of like menial labor jobs again, which destroys my interest in wanting to do any meaningful work with my life because they don't pay. Illegal stuff pays if you're betting on stuff, if you're doing stocks, if you're selling your body, if you're enabling yourself in illicit services, you're going to get paid. And that's where most of the nouveau riche, as far as I understand, is coming from. And it makes it feel ridiculous and stupid to want to do a 9 to 5 when you can just sell your feet on Feet Finder for the same amount of money. As long as you're willing to sell your dignity, you can go ahead and have that. And, I'm 30 at this point. I've worked 10 years. And that's why I'm making this video at this point, is because this is where I have been after 10 years of working. Is I don't want to do this shit anymore. I like to work. I like doing things with my hands. I like feeling responsible for doing things. I like completing things. I like going to the same place, looking at it and going, wow, I did that. I put those numbers in those doors. That was me. I did that. Going up to somebody who's grown up and like has their own thing and says like, look, I remember you. I did this thing and I hope that you're doing well. Making and forging that connection that is an investment in my future. Yet every single time I work at a job, it feels like I'm investing in the present. And I can't keep doing that because everybody else is future minded. I can't save any money because I'm not making enough money. I can't, I rack up credit card debts because I'm trying to continue to keep up with the Joneses. I'm paying for my car to be fixed. I'm paying for all of this. And I can't keep continuing to keep up with it. And now I have a job where it's doing that. And I'm still waiting to hear back from them. I'm not complaining about the fact that I got this job. I am just really tired of being poor. And that's why I made this live in the first place, is because every single time I say this to people where I say I'm really tired of being poor, they're just like, oh, you need to work harder. And I don't know what the fuck to do at this point other than to explain myself. And the fact of the matter is, okay, 10 minutes and 4 seconds. Or sorry, 10 minutes. 1 hour and 4 seconds. I needed to talk for this long, and there is not a soul on the planet that will allow me to do that other than here, where I can just talk for an hour and not have anything else kind of like spot up. I don't have anybody watching me on live chat. I don't have anybody doing this. It's a private space where I can just leave this thought behind. in its entirety. This collection of thoughts, this disappointment in the system around me, this want to make the system around me better, but realizing that the system just wants to be broken. And I can't keep contributing to that unless I somehow win. And every single time I try to do that, I don't. And it's very frustrating. So when somebody tells me you're not putting enough work in, you're just being lazy, I don't know what else to do at this point than to give them this video, let them sit through it, and create new talking points from it. Because I'm so fucking sick and tired of hearing everybody call me lazy. I'm an artist. I am working. I am depressed. I am traumatized. I have my own things go on throughout my life. I'm probably neurodivergent, but never got a diagnosis. I have been waiting on a psychologist for 3.5 years at this point to tell me everything that I need to know to put me on the right path. I am doing my best, but my best ain't good enough. And I am experiencing that so many places at this point that this next era of my life, my 30s are my no years. I can't do that. I'm sorry. Because I spent so much of my 20s and early saying, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Trying my best to be as helpful as possible, only to find out that being as helpful as possible actually gets nothing kind of done. So that's where I'm at. And also, that kind of explains why I haven't been making any content for this YouTube channel either. It's because I've been working all of the time. And I've been tired, and I've been depressed, and it's been very difficult to want to put the camera up on there. My back hurts. Like right now, as I'm standing up, I'm starting to redevelop a little bit of sciatica because I've been driving around the last couple of days and not really able to stretch my legs because you have to be out and about for 9 hours in order to pick up a delivery with DoorDash in Boston. Because again, I'm still waiting on Uber to fix their background check, even though I have already signed up for their service, did everything necessary to get the license to go ahead and go do biking and walking. Now I've got myself set up, and it wasn't my decision to do this. I would be more than happy to stay on the bike infrastructure, but there's a possibility I might get paid more. So I went to the green light, asked them to put my car in. They're saying, oh, and it's going to take less than a week. And it's been a week and a half at this point. I want to make money. I want to go out and work. I want to go out and keep a nest egg for myself. I want to make $70 today and say, okay, I'm done. I can go ahead and sit down and stretch now. So that's what's up. Again, hour and 8 minutes going into it. And that's what I need to say about work. There we go.